Well, good morning, all. Thank you so much for joining part 2 of our security showcase. And today we are going to feature network access control, NAC, and that's going to be our ClearPass product that allows you to authenticate and build policies around end user devices. Anything you plug into your network, you're going to be able to profile it and secure it. And this is one of our niche products that we offer in our security line. Many of you that are joining today have lots of questions and or want to know what's next. And today we have our very own product line manager, and that's Marc Ibanez, and he's going to provide some information, answer questions that you might have, and we hope that you're intrigued to set up an appointment with us next. My name is Brianna Gennaro, and I am the territory manager for the Southwest Aruba HPE Aruba team. A few special mentions. Want to let you know that if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to enter them into the Q&A as well as chat portion of the teams. And I will definitely, we'll try to make this interactive. So I will mention to Marc that we have some questions and see if he can answer those during the presentation. And then he is also allowed about 15 minutes after the presentation for Q&A. Another mention is that we are recording this session, and I will provide the recording to all of you as well as a feedback survey. So you can help make sure that this is beneficial and allow us to, give your positive feedback, and all feedback is good feedback. We want to make sure that these are beneficial to you. Thank you again for joining. Thank you for setting some time aside today. And Marc, I'm going to allow you to take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Brianna. And thank you guys for joining this session this morning. I'll introduce myself for a little bit. So my name is Marc Ibanez. I've been with Aruba for close to 6 years now. I've always been in the security product line. So right now I'm working on ClearPass, our network access control product. Previously, I was working on the security analytics product, which we do not offer anymore. It was called Introspect, and that's what I started off with. So I moved down the line and now I'm working with ClearPass, our flagship security product. I used to be based in the Bay Area, close to you guys, working out of our Santa Clara office. But just last summer, I moved to Florida, of all places. My wife got a new job opportunity just outside of Orlando. It's called Winter Park. And now I'm experiencing kind of these hot and humid summers that I'm not very used to yet. So, but that's where I am right now. So I'm still have the same role. I'm a senior technical marketing engineer. I'm still working in the same group. So nothing changed in terms of my job role. It's just my job location changed. So as Brianna mentioned, the main topic is really to talk about our NAC product, our network access control product, which is ClearPass. But I wanted to present it to you in the context of Zero Trust networking. You guys have probably heard about this term a lot. It's been kind of, I would say, hyped up a lot. Maybe it's overhyped, but it's something a lot of our customers and organizations are starting to subscribe to build a more secure network. And it's something that's been within the Aruba DNA almost since day one in terms of how we approach Zero Trust and how we built our products to implement Zero Trust. And so that's how I'm going to frame this presentation. It's going to be, I'm not sure if you guys had a chance to go to the Atmosphere conference that we had in Las Vegas back in April, but this is a presentation that we presented at that conference. And I'm just going to show it, give it to you guys here. If you have seen it before, I apologize. Hopefully I cover some other stuff that's new to you and that's more interesting. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started. Advance this properly? Okay, perfect. So just a quick introduction on what Zero Trust really means and kind of the principles that go along with Zero Trust. So just like the name says, basically we don't trust anything, any device or any user that gets onto the network. So we eliminate any sort of implicit trust. Every user has to, or device has to actually authenticate onto a network so we can identify who exactly they are. And once we identify the user or device, we assign the appropriate type of privilege in terms of what they can access or what type of resources they can access within the network. the main idea is to assign the least amount of privilege as possible, right? So if someone works in finance, they should only be able to access the financial systems in general, similar for HR and so forth. You kind of partition the resources and you give the accesses to those parts of the resources to the appropriate people that need to get access to those resources. So that's the general idea. And so that's really like just the beginning part of Zero Trust, like the first part of getting onto the network and assigning the role or access privileges. The second part, which is actually, I would say even more important, is the continuous monitoring, meaning we have to make sure these people are still behaving the way they should be. That there's no specific type of suspicious behavior that may be the case if somehow some some staff member or employee has somehow their credentials compromised, right? There could be some sort of there could be an attack, within your environment, and you have to kind of monitor that behavior and see if that kind of suspicious behavior arises and be able to respond and remediate those types of situations. So the continuous monitoring is really important as well, I would say. And so on the right side, it just gives a little bit of statistics and, Zero Trust as a concept, it's been around for some time, yet, organizations still, it could take time to kind of embrace the Zero Trust model. In fact, just slightly, the majority, 60% that we've seen have started to embrace Zero Trust. But they still haven't realized all of the benefits of Zero Trust. So I'd say this is more of a journey. You at least try to get started at some point, and I will show you how you can get started specifically with Aruba solution for implementing Zero Trust. And one of the challenges that we see organizations face is basically, they're using a lot of different platforms. There's a lot of platforms out there. Of course, in the security space, it's quite crowded. And sometimes when you're using a lot of different platforms to do specific things, whether it's identity access management or your firewalls or unified endpoint managers, there's so many different products out there that it's hard to kind of use them in a more of an integrated fashion to kind of help you, holistically implement Zero Trust. So that's one of the big challenges out there. And this is one where I think Aruba excels in terms of being able to integrate with other products. And in fact, ClearPass, you can think of it as the glue. It has all the access information that you need, but it also integrates with a whole host of other security vendors to be able to feed in more contextual information into ClearPass to help you build more, rich set of policies that are, fine-tuned for your environment. So that's what I'm going to kind of show you down this presentation. And the second challenge is around IoT devices in general. This has always been a challenge because they're kind of light in terms of the security stack that's implemented on an IoT device. So a lot of times they can't support a security agent, right? So that's usually the case. So how we go address those kind of situations, I'll talk about that in terms of IoT devices. Like Brianna said, as I go through the slides, feel free to ask questions at any time. So you can put it in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll take a break and answer the questions through. I prefer to answer the questions during the presentation rather than wait at the end, so that you can take care of that right away. Okay, so I'm going to start from, let's say, like the 10,000-foot view and then start drilling down. So we've introduced our Edge Services Platform, ESP, I'd say about 3 years ago now, as part of the Aruba Atmosphere Conference. And we've built this, it's grown, it's evolved more in time. But the basic layers here are still the same. So the first layer on the bottom you see is our infrastructure layer, we call the connect layer. I'm going to be primarily focusing on wireless and wired environments. that layer also talks about SD-WAN, our Silver Peak acquisition. We just actually acquired a company to do private 5G called Affinet. And we'll talk a little bit about IoT. But I'm not going to focus too much in this presentation on the SD-WAN and the 5G. It'll be primarily on wireless, wired, and IoT. And then for the security layer, this is the second layer you see there on the Protect. I'll go over those first 4 building blocks there. So from visibility to authentication to segmentation and then continuous monitoring, I'll cover those in more detail. But I will not cover the ones that are facing towards cloud services type of environment. So our SASE implementation and our Zero Trust implementation towards cloud. We actually have another acquisition that around the same time as the Affinet for 5G back in February, we have an acquisition of Access Security. And so that might be more of a follow-up session if you're interested more on the secure services edge. That's what Access Security covers, or that's what their product covers. And that's part of the SASE solution. So these are kind of all adjacent type of security solutions to what I'll cover today. So I just wanted to highlight that layer in particular for this presentation. So let's start to drill into our Zero Trust security framework. And it's more of you'll see it's more of a pinwheel. I'm going to go through 5 stages of our Zero Trust security framework. And the first stage really is about visibility. It's very important to really know exactly what type of devices are actually getting onto the network and doing the very accurate type of profiling to understand what exactly those devices they are. So we've had a history of products that have focused on this type of visibility solution. So ClearPass, it was actually the first product that included visibility to do the profiling, but we've advanced it to be more of a cloud-based product because we saw that the number of devices has really exploded, especially when you start taking into account all the IoT type of devices, right? Like could be HVAC systems or your normal printers and phones, but just the variety of IoT devices. And if you go across different spaces like medical devices and things like that, it just keeps growing and growing. And so we decided actually to build a visibility and profiling product that is more cloud-based, where the profiling engine is now residing in the cloud, and it's actually part of our central cloud management product. And we introduced ClearPass Device Insight, I'd say 3 years ago in 2020, and then that has evolved now into Client Insights, which is now part of Central, and that was introduced about 2 years ago in 2021. So I'll go over a little bit of that history and what those products do in a bit. But I just wanted to, on a high level, show you what we have in terms of visibility. So that's the first step. The second step is really then, once the devices are trying to connect to the network, obviously they're going to have to do some level of authentication. And we provide a lot of different options, whether it's AAA or non-AAA, on ClearPass Policy Manager. And now, just as a review, AAA, if you don't know the acronym, it stands for Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting. So authentication is the first step of AAA in being able to identify who the user is. Authorization is the piece where once you identify who the user is and authenticate, you authorize them to really access specific resources or specific parts of the network. That's the authorization part. And the accounting piece is really kind of the logging that takes place, when you do the authentication and authorization, you kind of have to have this accounting records to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. It's a part of all the accountability aspects of AAA. So we've had our flagship product, ClearPass Policy Manager. It's been our AAA authentication engine for quite a while now. I'd say like about 15 years. So it's been around for a while. It's continuing to evolve and add new features to it. And what I wanted to introduce in this presentation especially if you're an education customer, K through 12, for example. You may not need all the rich set of functionality of ClearPass Policy Manager, and that's actually normally runs on-prem using either a single server or a cluster of servers, depending on how many endpoints that you need to support. We've also introduced as a next step, or as a simplified type of NAC, we introduced Cloud Off. And I say simplified is because it really is simplified. Compared to ClearPass Policy Manager, it doesn't come close to implementing the full set of features that ClearPass has right now. It's our first step of implementing a NAC product in the cloud, and it's actually integrated as part of Central. And I'll talk about what we support right now in terms of Cloud Off in a bit. I just want to introduce that to you guys during this presentation. Okay, so that's the second step for authentication. Now, the third step is assigning the role to that user and doing role-based access control. And this implements that part of Zero Trust that I just mentioned about assigning the least amount of privilege to a user or device. And the way we've talked about this in Aruba is the concept of dynamic segmentation. So you guys probably heard of that already. And what you've heard about is more of our centralized way of implementing dynamic segmentation. It's where basically the overlay means like we have ClearPass that does the control function for the dynamic segmentation, the access control function, and that ties directly with the policy enforcement firewall that normally runs on your gateway. That's a centralized component of your network. So those two pieces are centralized, and that's how we've been doing that for a while now, the way we've implemented dynamic segmentation. But we've also kind of introduced the next generation of dynamic segmentation. I'd say we just introduced that about a year ago, last year's Atmosphere conference, but now it's actually in production this year, and this is also part of Central. We call it Net Conductor, and it's now a distributed, rather than centralized, it's more of a distributed implementation. And we allow flexible NAC solutions that can be used. So it could be Cloud Auth, it could be ClearPass. And then the policy enforcement firewall is now distributed. It's not just at the gateway, but we do inline enforcement at the switches along the way as well. So it's more distributed, it's also more scalable. And so for larger enterprise customers, usually this distributed is something they're looking at now. But I'd say for smaller SMB customers and education customers such as yourselves, I would say centralized overlay would still fit the bill for your deployments. So that's dynamic segmentation. The fourth step here, and this is what I said, is also a very important piece of implementing Zero Trust, is to do the continuous monitoring. And so continuous monitoring, we can collect data from different parts of the network. So it can be internally within the infrastructure. We can collect data from our firewall, from the SD-WAN, to understand a little bit more what the user is doing, what they're connecting to, what applications they're running, and so forth, and kind of monitor their behavior, 24/7. But like I said, we also have an ability to leverage other security products that you may already have in your environment. So basically, it's like use what you have and let us take advantage of the contextual information that you get from the other security products and feed it back into ClearPass, and use that to have more defined role-based access control or policies that you build within ClearPass. So we can integrate with unified threat management systems, like I said, MDM or UEM, like they're called unified endpoint managers, identity systems. So any other type of security vendor that you have already deployed, we'd like to leverage that. And this is nothing that costs extra. The security exchange is built in this 360-degree change is built into our product. So ClearPass kind of gives you that ability from day one with the license that you have. Okay, and then the last step is really if there is any type of suspicious behavior that we encounter as part of the continuous monitoring, we need to do something about that. We need to do some level of response and enforcement. And that's built into the policies that we create within ClearPass. And so that goes back to ClearPass Policy Manager to build a response, and this could also be triggered based on certain events happening. These actions can be automatically triggered so that it can be remediated as quickly as possible. The key point in the enforcement and the response is really how long it takes to respond, and not let it go on for days and days without knowing or not doing anything about it. So that's where ClearPass Policy Manager helps for that immediate type of response. Any questions so far on the 5 stages here before I go in each of them? So what I'm going to do next is go each of these stages in more detail.
And yeah, I don't see any questions as of yet, but I promise to let you know.
Sounds good. I'll just keep going. So we'll talk about the first stage, and this is the visibility stage. And it's really about understanding any type of device and what that gets onto your network, and understand what exactly they're doing, meaning what applications are they running, what destinations they're connecting to, what ports and protocols they could be using, right? And then comparing it to what they should be doing. So doing any type of behavior kind of anomaly, any type of anomalous behavior, we should actually try to even detect that and do something about it if they're not doing something they should be doing. So I gave a little bit of history on this visibility step. And today, what we focus on is our Client Insights product, which is actually it's built in now as part of Aruba Central. So if you have a foundation license on Central, the Client Insights is already there for you to use. There's nothing extra you need to do. And the change we made is that the telemetry that we get from your devices, from your endpoint devices, are now taken directly from the Aruba infrastructure. So basically from our APs, from our switches, and also from our gateway / controller, they now all have ability to send telemetry information from all the client devices up into the cloud, into Central, for analysis there. So like I mentioned, our profiling engine now sits up in the cloud so that we can scale it better. And Client Insights is basically taking those insights are coming from that profiling engine now running in the cloud. We have actually, I would say, improved the product by building this kind of within Central and allowing the telemetry to coming from within the Aruba products, because as customers have now automatically got this additional functionality, it's being used more and more. And we're also, at the same time, it's helping us, Aruba, because as you guys are using it more and more, we're collecting more and more data. It's actually giving us more insight in the types of devices that are out there. So obviously the user-based devices, whether they're smartphones or laptops, those we well know, and we have fingerprint data for those types of devices. But as more and more unique devices are get on the network, like I said, like those medical type devices or any other type of unique type of device, maybe it's a factory device or manufacturing device. In your environment, it may not be any exotic type of devices in an education environment besides the user-based devices. But anyways, my point is like we're getting more and more data, and it's actually helping our profiling engine become better and better. And so that's where we're at now. There was some previous history. You guys may have heard about ClearPass Device Insight. That was built a little bit differently. That was built with a standalone controller that you would have to deploy on premises. And I'm sorry, not controller, standalone collector. It was called a data collector. And the whole point of that data collector was that it was running a DPI engine. It was feeding, you would feed in a span port from like your distribution switch into that collector, and we would collect telemetry data from your devices from that collector. So now we found that our customers, there was a little bit of a friction in deploying the collector and where to put it. It's just another device you'd have to manage. So now we built it directly. You can say we put all of that collector functionality within the AP, within the switch, and within the gateway. So you don't have to deploy anything extra now. This is much easier to consume and get this data. So that's what we've done. That's how we evolved the visibility piece. And I would say it's working much, much better than when we first started with the ClearPass Device Insight. So that has been good news. So just a little bit on how Client Insights works. So as I said, that we do get the telemetry data streamed from the AP switches and gateways. It could be at any of the locations. It could be your central office, if it's a campus. It's already distributed, meaning all the APs that you have across the campus are already feeding that telemetry data up into central, into the cloud. So on the cloud or on central, our profiling engine actually consists of, I'd say, about 3 or 4 specific AI models that we have built. And like I said, it's because we get more and more data coming through central, the AI models get better because we're able to train them with more and more data. And these AI models allow us to pinpoint the specific client types. And so we've actually, I would say the accuracy of profiling that I've seen in terms of the data that we've collected with Client Insights, we got it up to like a 96 to 98% accuracy now. So that's a huge improvement, because I remember when I started working on ClearPass Device Insight, let's say like 3 years ago, that was on the order of 90%. So we've increased it up to 96, 98%. So it's a much better performing visibility profiling solution now. And on the right side, this is actually a preview of what we're planning to introduce into the products. I'd say this is going to come out by end of the year. And it's, again, using AI models to monitor for behavior of your user or devices. So typically, this is just an example here. If you're retail, you have let's say a point of sale machine, a Square register that should only be communicating with the associated Square server, or whether it's a CCTV camera that should only be communicating to where the video feed should be going to, right? Any deviation from that, any anomalous type of behavior, we would kind of flag based on the data that's feeding into our AI models. And so that's part of the continuous monitoring, actually, that Client Insights can actually support. And so, like I said, that's going to come out. It's a preview coming up by end of the year, and be able to, once we've flagged that anomalous behavior, then that actually can be fed back to ClearPass. So there's actually a direct integration between Central and ClearPass that you can do to integrate the two products, and that information back to ClearPass would help do the remediation and response to that anomalous behavior. All right, so that's the visibility piece. So the second step is around authentication. Before I get in here, is there any questions on the visibility, Brianna? Or did any other questions come up?
Not so far. I guess that means you're crystal clear, as you always are.
All right, I'm okay with that. So if everything's clear, that's good. Just checking, and don't be shy. Any questions, please ask them. As I'd prefer to make it as interactive as possible, and not just me giving you all this information. So the second step on authentication, I want to emphasize that, yes, this works directly with our Aruba infrastructure, but we've also, as Aruba, been pretty open-ended, meaning we also work with other infrastructure vendors. So ClearPass is kind of like the glue, like I mentioned before. Whether we use it as an authentication engine for Aruba products, we can also use it as an authentication engine for our third-party type infrastructure products that you might have in your environment. So in that case, there's so many different types of authentication methods out there. You can rank them from least secure to more secure. We basically advocate for the most secure, obviously, given the current environment. And so a lot of our customers are now actually moving towards the ETLS type of authentication, and that's more of a certificate-based authentication. And what that means is you actually would need to deploy a certificate to all your endpoint devices. And usually that's managed by an MDM type of solution. So we have different solutions out there, such as Microsoft Intune or Jamf or VMware Workspace ONE. Those are kind of just a sample set of those type of solutions. I've seen customers use any one of those three. Those are kind of what I've seen. And those would be the solutions that provide their certificate onto the devices, and then you'd be able to tie that certificate on ClearPass. We actually have an integration with each of those MDM vendors, and we can implement ETLS based on certificates. If you don't have that level of infrastructure or kind of the certificate infrastructure yet, obviously, like having a multi-factor type of implementation definitely helps. More and more customers are using that. So Ping ID is one of the more popular solutions for the multi-factor. But essentially what we advocate is that use the best possible that you can, right? The stronger, obviously, the better. And so ETLS is what I've seen more and more customers start using these days. Any questions on authentication?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to get into a little bit of a high level on ClearPass. So we don't have enough time to go through all the functionality of ClearPass. So I'm going to kind of break it up into these four main areas if you haven't seen ClearPass before. So I did mention that ClearPass has been a long time product for us. So it actually had the visibility functionality within ClearPass. The only thing is this visibility functionality only happens at the time of authentication, because the first time ClearPass gets data is when it's usually done through the Radius protocol. And so as soon as the Radius packets get into ClearPass, that's when we start inspecting or what type of device as we can pertain from the Radius traffic. And so that's only at the time of authentication. Whereas the client insights that I talked about, we actually collect that data through telemetry, and we can get that telemetry data even before the user or the device tries to authenticate. So that's more of a continuous type of telemetry, whereas ClearPass can only decipher the information at the time the user tries to authenticate. So that's really the main difference. And the profiling engine that runs on ClearPass, like it's a server, right? So it can only scale to so much. That's why we decided to move client insights up into the cloud to be more accurate and have more scalability. But you do basic profiling within ClearPass as well. The authentication, obviously, we talked about that. That's really the main kind of function of ClearPass. Authorization is kind of the first step after authentication. You would build these kind of contextual-based rules. It's more like a rules-based engine that's built into ClearPass. For example, if it's you can differentiate between an employee versus the guest versus the contractor, and each of these types of staff members have different types of rules in terms of what they can access within an environment. So it's really that type of rule-based engine that's built into ClearPass. And then we have the event-triggered actions is really part of our enforcement. So it's a full-fledged product that I mentioned earlier, and it's been used by a lot of our customers, small and large, through large. And we've always kept it open. We're not locked in just to Aruba products. You can use ClearPass with third-party vendors as well without an issue. And I've seen a lot of those cases as well. So what I wanted to spend a little bit more time on, because this may be newer, because we actually just introduced this about a year ago, is what we call Cloud Off. And this may be, it's a simplified NAC solution that may be good enough for your type of environment. Like I said, it doesn't have the full-fledged capabilities of ClearPass, but it could have it could meet the requirements that you may need just with what it has today. So the first thing is, since it's a cloud-based authentication, we decided to make this more tied to cloud-based identity stores. And so the top two cloud-based identity stores we see are either Azure Active Directory or Google Workspace. And I think a lot of educational customers are using the Google Workspace. It's kind of more cost-effective type of solution. So that's why we've opted to support Google as well. But obviously, a lot of other enterprise customers are using Microsoft, and Azure Active Directory is quite popular for the enterprise customers. But that's the first thing. So ClearPass, this differentiates to ClearPass because ClearPass is an on-prem product, and ClearPass normally ties into the on-prem identity, which is just basic, Microsoft Active Directory, Microsoft AD, which you kind of heard about. Azure Active Directory is not the on-prem, it's the cloud-based identity solution for Microsoft, and that's what we integrate here for Cloud Off. It's built into Central, so we've made the onboarding and authentication authorization workflow very simple and easy to use on Central. This is just a snapshot of what it looks like within the UI. It gives you kind of like a chart of what authentications are coming in, what have succeeded, what have failed, and so forth. And I have a little bit of an introduction to the onboarding process in the next slide for users. But in case of IoT onboarding, we've made it easier in terms of using MPSK or multi-pre-share keys for IoT type of device onboarding. But for user onboarding, what we have is, once you've tied your Central account into an identity store, whether that's Azure AD or Google Workspace, we now have to basically download a network profile to your user device. And we try to make this as simple as possible by we built an application that runs on both iPhone, iOS devices, or Android devices. It's called Aruba Onboard. So they would just have to download that device. They can basically, there's two methods we can send the information to the end user. You can either send the URL, or something we actually demonstrated at Atmosphere is you can send that in terms of a QR code. That's just probably easier for the end user to do the onboarding. But anyways, they just have to get that code or URL, and that will kind of be fed into this onboard application that's running on the smartphone device. And that's it. It's basically a quick 1, 2, 3 process. And that actually downloads. So we actually support ETLS authentication, like what I mentioned, the strongest method of authentication as part of Cloud Off. So that downloads the proper certificate onto the endpoint device so that they can connect on ETLS on the SSID that's tied to this Cloud Off solution. So I just wanted to emphasize that's really the quick and easy, simplified way of using network access control that's built into Central. Any questions on Cloud Off?
No questions.
Okay. All right. I'll just keep going.
We have a quiet crowd today.
No worries. Okay. So I talked about authentication. The third step now is the role-based access and the role-based segmentation. Within Aruba, we've called this dynamic segmentation, and I'll kind of talk more about the centralized way of implementing dynamic segmentation. So here you see on the left side, the types of users and devices that get onto the network. We do that profiling either on Client Insights or ClearPass Device Insight. And what we can do is assign a specific role to the various types of users or the various types of devices. So for a user, a user can either use, let's say, a corporate assigned laptop, or they can bring their own device. You might want to differentiate between those two. So we have a role for corp versus a role for your BYOD device. And then for another user that's a guest, that's not even part of your staff, you can assign a separate role for the guests. And then for IoT devices, we segment that out as a separate role for themselves as too for IoT. So these are kind of like the 4 roles you can define. And within ClearPass Policy Manager, we can take these roles and authorize them. Basically, that's the kind of the role-based engine that allows them to reach or access specific destinations based on their role. And that gets fed back into the policy and enforcement firewall that sits within the gateway. So there's a strong tie-in between ClearPass Policy Manager and the gateway to implement the dynamic segmentation. And so, for example, if it's a member of your staff member that does need to access your corporate applications, you want to have the corp, let's say, be able to access the Office 365 applications. But if it's a BYOD device that's not allowed to access, sensitive records, let's say you're in an education environment, you don't want any BYOD device to be able to access the sensitive academic records. We can block access to that, right? And obviously, we always want to block access to any type of dangerous websites. And then if it's like a IoT device, for example, if you have conference rooms where you have, like, let's say, Apple TVs that need to be able to be shared to your users to be able to display the content from let's say, your laptop to the Apple TV, you can set up basically a defined air group for that to be able to isolate the traffic just for displaying your screen to Apple TV in conference room. So the idea is we try to make it, again, this type of dynamic segmentation is based on roles, and the roles are assigned at the time of you do your authentication. You assign these roles at the time of authorization, actually, which we talked about that ClearPass can do. All right, so that's dynamic segmentation. What we've done since is really on the right side created a more scalable type of implementation of dynamic segmentation. So we now have a distributed overlay type of enforcement, and we just try to make this more flexible so that now you can use any type of NAC, whether it's ClearPass or CloudAuth or even a third-party NAC in some cases. And we distributed the enforcement not just within the gateway, but it's now the enforcement points are all throughout your network within the switches and gateways. And so this is more scalable, has higher performance, and it actually can be the same type of segmentation rules apply across the campus and data center. And so wasn't going to spend too much time on that other than just to introduce that distributed solution is now available. It's now as part of Central. The name for the solution is called Net Conductor, and so that could be additional follow-up if it's needed. But for most of our customers, like for our smaller to medium customers, that centralized overlays is already a good enough solution. So you may not need to even have to get into the NAC conductor in that case. All right. Okay, so now we get into the fourth step. And this is where I think Aruba can provide a lot of value in terms of being able to integrate with our third-party ecosystem. So the bottom half of that right picture is really your network, your network infrastructure. That's what we've talked about already. And what I wanted to do now is be able to kind of get more contextual information from your other security products that you're already deployed. So that could be a firewall, it could be a SIM, it could be an endpoint manager. And we want to be able to feed in our ClearPass with all that additional, valuable contextual information that you have on these other security products. And so we have actually, based on feedback from our customers, we built, I would say over 150 integrations to date. And so it just keeps growing and growing based on the feedback we get from you guys. And so a lot of these names you see here are probably familiar to you. And if you see a vendor here that you are using, then that's something that we can, we can talk about adding as an integration into your ClearPass environment, so we can make more use of the contextual information we get from these other vendors. And so this can be bidirectional, meaning sometimes you feed ClearPass, that's the main use case, but sometimes the ClearPass can actually go and feed the information that we take in terms of authentication back to the other devices for use by them. So it's a two-way communication. And these are jointly supported. So all of these names you see here are basically our technology partners that we have basic contacts with, and we basically monitor, updates from their side. They monitor updates from our side, and our integrations, get updated, continuously. And so, so this is something I definitely highly recommend you look into and be able to leverage, other security products that you already have. And so basically use what you have is what we want you to do. And so I wanted to show an example here of how this works on ClearPass. So on ClearPass, the way we implement these integrations is we call it an extension. And it runs alongside ClearPass. So basically, it's an additional, platform. The ClearPass software, for the authentication and authorization, that runs on the mainline software. The extensions are actually added separately. So it's independent of the mainline software. It's actually run on a Docker container. So it's kind of independent of ClearPass, but it directly communicates with ClearPass. And so its goal, or the functions of that extension, is really to either send an update or send information to the third-party security vendor, or we accept information from the third-party vendor back to us, and we can use that to change state inside of ClearPass. So it actually kind of acts like a middleware type of system between ClearPass and the third-party system. And so that's how we built these extensions. And so each of those names you saw earlier, there's an extension for that vendor to be able to do that integration. And just to kind of just show the example specifically, for UEM vendors, these are the Unified Endpoint Managers, or we also call them MDM, Mobile Device Managers. And you see all these vendor names here, Microsoft, Google, Jamf, Mobile Iron. These are the samples of UVM vendors out there, and they can track a lot of different things that on the device itself, whether they're up to date in terms of the OS, whether there's certain set of apps that you might want to block, and that's what can be done by these MDM vendors. And if there is a detection of jailbreak, which is non-compliant, you can detect that. And if the device gets lost, you may want to do a device wipe because there might be sensitive data on that device. So anyways, that's what the UEM vendors, that's their domain of what they do. And so it's outside of the ClearPass domain. So we want to make use of those types of attributes or contextual information. And you can feed that back into us through an extension. And so we have that connector, and we can use those device attributes to build policies that more fine-tuned to what you have from these other vendors. So that's what I wanted to share there, just to give a little bit of a flavor of what we can do with these extensions. All right, so I'm just going to wrap it up here. This is my last slide, just how we bring it all together. So as I mentioned, in terms of a zero trust environment, if you want to implement that, we talked about four or five stages here. And basically, we have the visibility stage. You have to understand what gets connected on your network. You got to make sure all your users and devices are properly authenticated with the best type of authentication methods that you have. We basically want to assign the least amount of access to your user and devices, and we do that based on dynamic segmentation. And then we want to continuously monitor your environment. And that's part of the integrations that we have with the other security vendors to be able to feed that information back to us. All right, so that's what I have for today. So I will take any open questions.